So, hello, welcome back. Me being me, I am filming this the morning I leave on my trip because I don't want to bring Ivanhoe along with me because the end of this book already has pages falling out. The dangers of used books. I mean, this one doesn't even have the excuse of being read in my bed and therefore, like, thrown all over my bed because, yeah. That that sentence got away from me. Anyway, I have 2 chapters left, and I think I can get them done before I have to leave. So, huzzah, yay, and all of those other things. We are going to finish this book, and I'm kind of excited about that. Like I said, our next series or our next book will be up for a vote. I'm going to put a poll in my community page, and it's just going to be up until I get home, and that'll be next week towards the end of the week. So we have an entire week to vote on what we want. The choices are going to be between Bruce, which I still can't find, but I do have it. I just have to figure out where I stuck it. Around the World in 80 Days, and Tom Swift and his House on Wheels. I was like, it's Tom Swift and his something, which I found out that Tom Swift is like actually a series. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, though, we have to finish this book, and I don't have a lot of time to get these read and uploaded, so I'm not going to waffle around too much. Let's jump in and see what our quote is, shall we? Be Mowbray's sins so heavy in his bosom that they may break his foaming courser's back, and throw the rider headlong in the lists, a caitiff recreant. Recreant? I don't know how to say that word, but it's from Richard II. All right, so I guess maybe we're finally jousting for Rebecca's honor. Maybe? I guess we'll find out as we jump back into chapter 43 of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Our scene now returns to the exterior of the castle, or precipitory, of Templestowe, about the hour when the bloody die was to be cast for the life or death of Rebecca. It was a scene of bustle and life, as if the whole vicinity had poured forth its inhabitants to a village wake or maybe a rural feast. But the earnest desire to look good on blood and death is not peculiar to these dark ages. Though, in the gladiatorial exercise of single combat and general tourney, they were habituated to the bloody spectacle of brave men falling at each other's hands. Even in our own days, when morals are better understood, an execution, a bruising match, a riot, or a meeting of radical reformers collects, at much hazard to themselves, immense crowds of spectators, otherwise little interested except to see how matters are to be conducted, or whether the heroes of the day are, in the heroic language of insurgent traders, flints or dunghills. The eyes, therefore, of a very considerable multitude were bent on the gate of the Presbytery of Templestowe with the purpose of witnessing the procession, while even more numbers had already surrounded the tilt yard belonging to that establishment. This enclosure was formed on a piece of level ground adjoining the presbytery, which had been leveled with care for the exercise of military and chivalrous sports. It occupied the brow of a soft and gentle eminence, was carefully palisaded around, and, as the Templars willingly invited spectators to be witness of their skill in feats of chivalry, was amply supplied with galleries and benches for them to use. On this present occasion, a throne was erected for the Grand Master at the east end, surrounded with seats of distinction for the preceptors and the knights of the order. Over these floated their sacred standard called Le Beau Sang, which was the sign as its name was the battle cry of the Templars. At the opposite end of the list was a pile of wood so arranged around a stake deeply fixed into the ground as to leave a space for the victim who they were destined to consume to enter the fatal circle, in order to be chained to the stake by the fetters which hung ready for that purpose. Next to this deadly apparatus stood 4 slaves, whose features, so little known in England then, appalled the multitude, who gazed on them like demons employed in their own diabolical exercises. These men stirred not at all, excepting now and then, under the direction of one who seemed to be their chief, to shift and replace the fuel. They did not look at the multitude. In fact, they seemed insensible of their presence and of everything else save their own horrible duties. And when in speech with each other, they expanded their lips and showed their teeth as if they grinned at the thought of the expected tragedy. The commoners could scarce help believe that they were actually the spirits with whom the witch had been communing, and who, her time being done, were now ready to assist in her punishment. They whispered to each other and communicated all the feats which Satan had performed during that busy and unhappy period, not failing, of course, to give the devil even more than his usual due. Also, side note, that that paragraph, I did not read as written because, oh dear goodness, the slaves were described, the past was the worst. We'll just leave it at that. Back to the chapter. Have you not heard, Father Dennet, said one boor to another, that the devil has carried away bodily the great Saxon thane Athelstine of Coinsborough? Aye, but he brought him back by the blessing of God and St. Dunstan. What's that? Said a brisk young fellow, dressed in a green cassock embroidered with gold, and having at his heels a stout lad with a harp upon his back, which betrayed what his job was. The minstrel seemed of no vulgar rank, for besides the splendor of his gaily brocaded doublet, he wore around his neck a silver chain by which hung the rest or key which he tuned his harp with. On his right arm was a silver plate, which, instead of bearing the usual cognizance or badge of the baron to whose family he belonged, had barely the word Sherwood engraved upon it. What do you mean by that? Said the minstrel, mingling in the conversation of the peasants. I came to seek one subject for my rhyme, and, by Our Lady, I'd be glad to find 2. It is well known, said the old peasant, that after Athelstine of Coinsborough had been dead 4 weeks. That's impossible, said the minstrel. I saw him in life at the passage of arms at Ashby de la Zouche. Dead? However, he was, or else translated, said the young peasant, for I heard the monks of St. Edmund's singing the death hymn for him, and, moreover, there was a rich death meal and a dole at the castle of Coinsborough, as right was, and I had gone there, or I would have, except for Mabel Parkins, who... Aye, dead was Athelstine, said the old man, interrupting, and the more pity it was for the old Saxon blood. But your story, my young masters, said the minstrel impatiently. Aye, construe us the story, said a burly friar, who walked up beside them, leaning on a pole that exhibited an appearance between a pilgrim's staff and a quarterstaff, and probably acted as either when occasion served. Your story, said the churchman. Don't burn daylight about it. We have little time. Well, and please your reverence, said Dennet, a drunken priest came to visit the Saracen at St. Edmund's. That does not please my reverence, said the churchman, that there should be such an animal as a drunken priest, or, if there were, that a layman should speak to him. Be mannerly, my friend, and conclude that the holy man only was wrapped in meditation, which makes your head dizzy and your foot unsteady, as if the stomach were filled with new wine. I myself have felt this many a time. Well, then, said the man Dennet, a holy brother came to visit the Saracen at St. Edmund's, a kind of hedge priest is the visitor, and he kills half the deer that are stolen in the forest, who loves the tinkling of a pint pot better than the scarring bell, and deems a fitch of bacon worth 10 of his brevity. He came for rest, a good fellow and merry, who will flourish a quarterstaff, draw a bow, and dance a Cheshire round with whatever man he finds in Yorkshire. The last part of your speech, Dennet, said this minstrel, has saved you a rib or two. Ah, I don't fear this man, said this Dennet man. I am somewhat old and stiff, but when I fought for the Bell and the Ram at Doncaster. But your story, my friend, said the minstrel again. Why, the tale is but this. Athelstine of Coinsborough was buried at St. Edmund's. That's a lie, and a loud one, interrupted the friar, for I saw him borne to his castle at Coinsborough. No. Then tell the story yourself, my masters, said the old man Dennet, turning sulky at all of these contradictions, and it was with some difficulty that this boorish idiot could be prevailed upon by the request of his comrade and the minstrel to take up his tale again. These two sober friars, he finally said, since this reverend man needs to have them as such, had continued drinking good ale and wine and whatnot for the better part of a summer's day, when they were awoken by a deep groan and a clanking of chains, and they saw the figure of the dead Athelstine entering the apartment, saying, "Evil shepherds." That's false, said the friar. He never spoke a word. Ho, ho, Friar Tuck, said the minstrel, pulling him apart from the rustics. We've started a new tale here, I find. I tell you, Allan a Dale, said Friar Tuck, I saw Athelstine of Coinsborough as much as bodily eyes ever saw a living man. He did have his shroud on, and everything about him smelled of the sepulchre. A butt of sack will not wash that away from my memory. Oh, pshaw, said the minstrel, who we now know as Allan a Dale. You jest with me. Don't believe me, said Friar Tuck. And I fetched not a knock at him with my quarterstaff that would have felled an ox, and it glided through his body as if he were a pillar of smoke. Well, by St. Hubert, said Allan a Dale the minstrel, it is a wonderful tale, and it is fit to be put to metre, and the ancient tune, Sorrow Came to the Old Friar, might suit it. Laugh if you must, said Friar Tuck. But catch me singing on such a theme, and, well, may the next ghost or devil carry me off with him. No, I instantly form the purpose of assisting at some good work, such as the burning of a witch, a judicial combat, or a manner of godly service, and that's how I ended up here. As they talked, the heavy bell of the church of St. Michael of Templestowe, A venerable building situated in a hamlet some distance away from the presbytery broke short their argument. One by one, the sullen sounds fell successively on the ear, leaving but sufficient space for each to die away in a distant echo before the air was again filled by the repetition of the iron knell. These sounds, the signal of the approaching ceremony, chilled with awe the hearts of the assembled multitude, whose eyes were now turned to the presbytery, expecting the approach of the Grand Master, the champion, and the criminal. At length the drawbridge fell, the gates opened, and a knight bearing the great standard of the order sallied from the castle, preceded by 6 trumpets, and followed by the knights preceptors, 2 by 2, the Grand Master coming last, mounted on a stately horse, whose gear was of the simplest kind. Behind him came Brian de Bois Guilbert, armed cap a pie in bright armor, but without his lance, shield, and sword, which were being borne by his 2 esquires behind him. His face, though partly hidden by a long plume which floated down from his cap, bore a strong and mingled expression of passion, in which pride seemed to contend with irresolution. He looked ghostly pale, as if he had not slept for many nights, yet reined his pawing warhorse with the habitual ease and grace proper to the best lance in the order of the Temple. His general appearance was grand and commanding, but looking at him with attention, men read that in his dark features, from which they willingly turned their eyes away from. On either side rode Conrad of Montfichet and Albert de Malvision, who acted as the godfathers of this champion. They were in their robes of peace, the white dress of the order, and behind them followed the other companions of the Temple, with a long train of squires and pages dressed in black, aspirants to the honor of one day becoming a knight of the order. After these neophytes came a guard of wardens on foot at the same in the same sable livery, amidst whom partisans might be seen the pale form of the accused. She moved with a slow but unyielding step towards the scene of her fate. She had been stripped of all her ornaments, lest perchance there should be among them some of those amulets which Satan was supposed to give to his victims to deprive them of the power of confession even when they're being tortured. A coarse white dress, of the simplest form, had been substituted for her other garments, yet there was such an exquisite mixture of courage and resignation on her face that even in this garb, and with no other ornament than her long black hair, every eye that looked upon her wept, and the most hardened bigot regretted the fate that had converted a creature so beautiful into a vessel of wrath, and a slave of the devil, of course. A crowd of lesser people belonging to the presbytery followed the victim, all moving with the utmost order, with their arms folded and their eyes upon the ground. This slow procession moved up the gentle hill, on the summit of which was the tilting yard, and entering the lists, they marched once around it from left to right, and when they had completed this circle, they halted. There was then a momentary bustle, while the Grand Master and all of his attendants, except for the champion and his godfathers, dismounted from their horses, which were immediately removed out of the lists by the squires, who were there for specifically that purpose. The unfortunate Rebecca was conducted to the black chair that was near the pile. On her first glance at the terrible spot where preparations were making for a death alike dismaying to the mind as it was painful to the body, she was observed to shudder and close her eyes, doubtless praying internally, for her lips moved, though no one heard her speak. In the space of a minute, though, she opened her eyes and looked fixedly upon the pile as if to familiarize her mind with the object, and then she slowly turned her head away. Meanwhile, the Grand Master had assumed his seat, and when the chivalry of his order was placed around and behind him, each in his due rank, a loud and long flourish of the trumpets announced that the court was now seated for judgment. Malvasion, then, acting as the godfather of the champions, stepped forward and laid the glove of Rebecca, which was the pledge of battle, down at the feet of the Grand Master. "Valorous lord and reverend father," he said, "here stands the good knight Brian de Bois Guilbert, knight preceptor of the Order of the Temple, who, by accepting the pledge of battle which I now lay at your reverence's feet, has become bound to do his best in combat this day, to maintain that this maiden, named Rebecca, justly deserves the doom passed upon her in a chapter of this most holy order of the Temple of Zion, condemning her to death as a sorceress. Here, I say, he stands, such battle to do, knightly and honorable, if this is your noble and sanctified pleasure." "Has he made the oath," said the Grand Master, "that his quarrel is just and honorable? Bring forward the crucifix and the tigatur." "Sir, and most reverend father," said Malvasion quickly, "our brother here present has already sworn to the truth of his accusation in the right hand of the good knight Conrad de Montfichet, and otherwise he ought not be sworn, seeing that his adversary is an unbeliever, and she may take no oath." This explanation was satisfactory, to Albert's great joy, for the wily knight had foreseen the great difficulty, or impossibility, of prevailing upon Brian de Bois Guilbert to take such an oath before the assembly, so he had invented this excuse to escape him having to do so. The Grand Master, having allowed the apology of Albert Malvasion, commanded the herald to stand forth and do his duty. The trumpets flourished again, and a herald, stepping up, proclaimed aloud, "Oyez, oyez, oyez! Here stands the good knight, Brian de Bois Guilbert, ready to do battle with any knight of free blood who will sustain the quarrel allowed and allotted to this woman Rebecca, to try by champion in respect of lawful assault of her own body, and to such champion the revered and valorous Grand Master here present allows a fair field and equal partition of sun and wind, and whatever else appeals to fair combat." The trumpet sounded again, and there was dead silence for many minutes. "No champion appears for the appellant," said the Grand Master. "Go, herald, ask her whether she expects anyone to do battle for her cause." The herald went to the chair in which Rebecca was seated, and Bois Guilbert, suddenly turning his horse's head towards the end of the lists, in spite of hints on either side from Malvasion and Montfichet, was immediately at the side of Rebecca's chair as quickly as the herald. "Is this regular, according to the law of combat?" said Malvasion, looking to the Grand Master. "Albert Malvasion it is," said Beaumaurier, "for in this appeal to the judgment of God we may not prohibit parties from having that communication with each other which may best tend to bring forth the truth of their argument." Meanwhile, the herald spoke to Rebecca in these words: "Damsel, the honorable and reverend Grand Master demands of you if you are prepared with a champion to do battle this day on your behalf, or if you yield as one justly condemned to your deserved fate." "Say to the Grand Master," said Rebecca, "that I maintain my innocence, and do not yield me as justly condemned, lest I become guilty of my own blood. Say unto him that I challenge such delay as forms will permit, to see if God, whose opportunity is man's extremity, will raise me up a deliverer, and when such utmost space is passed away, well, then his holy will be done." The herald retired to carry this answer to the Grand Master. "God forbid," said Lucas Beaumorier, "that a pagan should impeach us of being unjust," he said. "Until the shadows be cast from the west to the east, we will wait to see if a champion shall appear for this woman. When the day has so far passed, well, then let her prepare to die." The herald took the words of the Grand Master to Rebecca, who bowed her head, folded her arms, and then, looking up towards heaven, seemed to expect that aid from above which she could scarce promise herself from man. During this awful pause, the voice of Bois Guilbert broke upon her ear. It was only a whisper, yet it startled her more than the summons of the herald. "Rebecca," said the Templar, "do you hear me?" "I have no words for you, cruel, hard-hearted man," she said. "Yes, but do you understand my words?" said the Templar. "For the sound of my voice is frightful to my own ears. I scarce know on what ground we stand, or for what purpose they have brought us here. This listed space, that chair, that wood, I know their purpose, yet it appears to me like something unreal, the fearful picture of a vision which appalls my senses with hideous fantasies, but convinces not my mind." "Well, my mind and senses keep touch and time," said Rebecca, "and tell me alike that this wood is destined to consume my earthly body, and open a painful but brief passage to a much better place." "Dreams, Rebecca, dreams," said the Templar. "Idle visions, rejected by the wisdom of your own wiser seduces. Listen to me, Rebecca," he said, becoming more animated. "A better chance you have for life and liberty than these knaves and that old man dream of. Get behind me on my horse, on Zamor, the gallant horse that never has failed his rider. I won him in single combat from the Soldan of Terzabond. Mount, I tell you, behind me. In 1 hour the pursuit and the inquiry will be far behind, and a new world of pleasure will open to you. To me, a new career of fame. Let them speak the doom that I despise. Let them erase the name of Bois Guilbert from their lists of monastic slaves. I will wash out with blood whatever blot they cast upon me." "Begone, tempter," said Rebecca. "Begone. Not in this last extremity can you move me one hair's breadth from my resigned place. Surrounded as I am by enemies, I hold you as my worst and most deadly, and I avoid you in the name of God." Albert Malvoisin, alarmed and impatient at the length of their speaking, now came to interrupt them. "Has the maiden acknowledged her guilt?" he demanded, "or is she still in denial?" "She is indeed resolute," said Bois Guilbert. "Then," said Malvoisin, "you must, noble brother, resume your place to attend upon this issue. The shades are changing on the circle of the dial. Come, Bois Guilbert, come. You are the hope of our holy order, and soon to be the head of it." As he said this in a soothing tone, he laid his hand upon the knight's bridle, as if to lead him back to his station. "False villain! What do you mean by putting your hands on my horse?" said Sir Brian. And, shaking off his companion's grip, he rode back to the upper end of the lists. There's yet spirit to him, said Malvoisin, speaking to Montfichet, were it well directed, but like Greek fire, it burns whoever approaches it. The judge had now been 2 hours in the lists, awaiting, in vain it seemed, the appearance of any champion. And reason good, said Friar Tuck, seeing she is a Jewish woman, and yet, by mine order, it is hard that such a young and beautiful creature should perish without one blow being struck in her defense, even if she were 10 times a witch, provided she were the least bit a Christian. Well, my quarterstaff would ring noon on the steel cap of that young Templar there. It was, however, the general belief that no one could or would appear for a Jewish woman accused of sorcery, and the knights, instigated by Malvoisin, whispered to each other that it was time to declare the pledge of Rebecca fortified. At this instant, though, a knight, urging his horse to high speed, appeared on the plain and advanced to the lists, and 100 voices cried, "A champion! A champion!" And despite the prepossessions and the prejudices of the multitude, they all shouted unanimously as this knight rode into the tilt yard. A second look, though, seemed to destroy the hope that his timely arrival had excited. His horse, urged for many miles to utmost speed, appeared to stagger from fatigue, and the rider, however undaunted he presented himself in the list, either from weakness, weariness, or both, scarce seemed able to support himself in the saddle. To the summons of the herald, who demanded his rank, his name, and purpose, the strange knight answered readily and bodily, "I am a good knight and noble, come here to sustain with lance and sword the just and lawful quarrel of this damsel, Rebecca, daughter of Isaac of York, to uphold the doom pronounced against her to be false and truthless, and to defy Sir Brian de Bois Guilbert as traitor, murderer, and liar, as I will prove on this field with my body against his, by the aid of the God of Our Lady and of Monseigneur St. George, the good knight." "The stranger must first show," said Malvoisin, "that he is a good knight, and of honorable lineage. The Temple sendeth not forth her champions against nameless wretches. "My name," said the knight, raising his helmet, "is better known, and my lineage more pure, Malvoisin, than yours. I am Wilfred of Ivanhoe." "I will not fight with you right now," said the Templar, in a changed and hollow voice. "Get your wounds healed. Get you a better horse, and it may be that I will hold it worth my while to scourge out of you this boyish spirit of bravado." "Ha! Proud Templar," said Ivanhoe, "have you forgotten that twice you fell before this lance? Remember the lists at Acre. Remember the passage of arms at Ashby. Remember your proud vaunt in the halls of Rotherwood, and the gage of your gold chain against my reliquary. And you would do battle with Wilfred of Ivanhoe and recover the honor you have lost, huh? By that reliquary and the holy relic that it contains, I will proclaim you, Brian de Bois Guilbert, Templar, a coward in every court in Europe, in every presbytery of your order, unless you do battle with me without any further delay." Brian de Bois Guilbert turned his face irresolutely towards Rebecca, and then said, looking at Ivanhoe, "Dog of a Saxton, take your lance and prepare for the death that you have drawn down upon you." does the Grandmaster allow me combat?" said Ivanhoe. "I may not deny what you have challenged," said the Grandmaster, "provided the maiden accepts you as her champion. Yet, I would that you were in better condition to do battle. An enemy of our order you have ever been, yet I would have you honorably met." "Thus I am, and not otherwise," said Ivanhoe. "It is the judgment of God. To his keeping I commend myself. Rebecca," he said, as he rode up to the fatal chair, "do you accept me as your champion?" "I do," she said. "I do," fluttered by an emotion which the fear of death had been unable to produce. "I do accept thee as the champion who heaven has sent me. Yet, no, no, your wounds are uncured. Do not meet that proud man. Why should you perish as well?" But Ivanhoe was already at his post, and had closed his visor and assumed his lance. Bois Guilbert did the same, and his squire remarked, as he clamped down the visor, that his face, which had, notwithstanding the variety of emotions by which he had been agitated, continued during the whole morning an ashy paleness, but now suddenly became quite flushed. The herald, seeing each champion in his place, lifted his voice and repeated 3 times, "Faites vos devoirs, Père Chevalier." Wow, you wouldn't guess that I had taken 7 years of French. After he cried this 3 times, he withdrew to one side of the lists and again proclaimed that none, on peril of death, should dare by word, cry, or action interfere or disturb this fair field of combat. The Grand Master, who held in his hand the gauge of battle, Rebecca's glove, now threw it into the lists and pronounced the fatal words, "Laissez aller." The trumpet sounded. The knights charged each other in full gallop. The tired horse of Ivanhoe and its no less exhausted rider went down, as everyone expected, before the well-aimed lance and the vigorous steed of the Templar. This issue of combat everyone had foreseen, but although the spear of Ivanhoe did but in comparison touch the shield of Bois Guilbert, that champion, to the astonishment of everyone who saw it, reeled in the saddle, lost his stirrups, and also fell. Ivanhoe, pulling himself from his fallen horse, was soon on foot, hastening to mend his fortune with his sword, but his antagonist did not raise. Wilfred, placing his foot on his breast and the sword point to de Bois Guilbert's throat, commanded him to yield or die. Bois Guilbert said not a word. "Slay him not, Sir Knight," cried the Grand Master. "Unshriven and unabsolved, do not kill body and soul. We will allow you to say he is vanquished." He then descended to the lists and commended them to unhelm the conquered champion. His eyes were closed. The dark red flush was still on his brow as they looked on him in astonishment. His eyes opened, but they were fixed and glazed. The flush passed away from his brow and gave way to the pallid hue of death. Unscathed by the lance of his enemy, he had died a victim to the violence of his own contending passions. "Well, this is indeed the judgment of God," said the Grand Master, looking up. "Fiat voluntas tua." And that is the end of the chapter. I'm glad there's one more chapter because that was the most unsatisfying trial by combat I think possibly has ever been committed to paper. I guess he had a heart attack? Maybe? Or a stroke? I don't know. I have a confusion. Oops. and I just dropped a book on the floor. And I still have one more chapter. So I'm going to upload this. Then I'm going to come and sit back down. I will be in exactly the same outfit, read the final chapter so that we can have it all ready while I am gone. So discuss amongst yourselves in the comments what you thought of this chapter, because, I have thoughts, but I can't formulate them other than that was unsatisfying. Anyway, I will see you later for the very last chapter of Ivanhoe. Hit the thumbs up on your way out, and I'll see you then.